20 dangers kids totally ignored in the 1970s. Were you really safe growing up in the 1970s? You might be surprised. From chasing DDT trucks to flying down hills with no helmets, childhood was packed with risks we barely noticed. Which of these dangers did you survive? Stick around and let's take a wild trip down memory lane together. Playing on train tracks. If you grew up in the 1960s or 1970s, there's a good chance you remember the local train tracks as more than just a way for cargo to get from place to place. They were the ultimate playground. For kids back then, those rails seemed to stretch on forever, promising endless adventure just beyond the edge of the neighborhood. On lazy summer afternoons, groups of friends would head out to the tracks, daring each other to balance on the rails like circus performers or lay down pennies to be squashed flat by the next passing locomotive. But it didn't stop there. The bravest among them would test their nerve by walking across narrow trestle bridges that towered over creeks and ravines, all while keeping a sharp ear out for the distant rumble of an approaching train. For some, the thrill was in the danger, the pounding heart, the rush of adrenaline, and the bragging rights that came with making it to the other side before the train appeared. Others just enjoyed the freedom and camaraderie of exploring a place that felt off-limits to adults. Looking back now, it's almost unthinkable how risky these games were. Today, we know the real dangers, how quickly trains can sneak up, how a simple misstep could mean disaster. But for kids in those days, playing on train tracks was just another part of growing up wild and free, with stories and memories that have lasted a lifetime. No seatbelts. Back in the days of wood-paneled station wagons and summer road trips, seatbelts were more like an afterthought, if they even existed at all. Instead of being buckled in, kids were sprawled out in the back, building forts with pillows, passing snacks, or even lying down for a nap as the scenery blurred past the window. The rear-facing seat in the way back was the hottest ticket in the car, giving kids a front-row seat to wave at strangers or invent games as miles rolled by. Parents packed the car to the brim, cousins, friends, maybe even the family dog, all bouncing around while someone shouted out license plate bingo or sang along to a favorite tune on the radio. No one thought much about safety harnesses. It was all about squeezing in and making the ride part of the adventure. Sudden stops meant a pile of laughing, tangled kids, and sharp turns had everyone sliding across the seat, howling with delight. These journeys felt endless and full of possibility. Every bump and turn another story to share. The freedom of those unrestrained rides left a mark, a feeling of pure childhood adventure, before safety rules changed the way we traveled forever. Smoking everywhere. There was a time when the scent of cigarette smoke was woven into the fabric of everyday life. Walk into any diner, movie theater, or even the doctor's office, and you'd find ashtrays on every table, their silver edges brimming with smoldering butts. Picture walking into a fancy restaurant in the 1970s. The chatter of diners, the clink of silverware, and a thick haze of cigarette smoke drifting through the air. In those days, smoking wasn't just common, it was everywhere. Movie stars lit up on the big screen, celebrities puffed away on TV, and even doctors appeared in magazine ads with a cigarette in hand. Ashtrays sat on every table, and lighting up indoors was as normal as ordering dessert. Most people never gave it a second thought, but everything changed when the Surgeon General's report dropped in 1964, revealing the deadly link between smoking and lung cancer. The news hit like a shockwave. Slowly, attitudes began to shift. Warnings appeared, bans followed, and smoking gradually vanished from the spaces we share. Today, walking into a restaurant means breathing in the aroma of fresh food, not a fog of smoke. Rules and awareness have transformed public spaces, making them healthier and cleaner than ever. The smoky haze of the 60s and 70s is now just a memory, one that marks just how much the world and our understanding of health has changed. BB gunfights. In the days before video games and constant supervision, a BB gun was the ultimate neighborhood status symbol. Nearly every kid longed for one, and owning a BB gun meant you were ready for adventure. Weekends transformed backyards and empty lots into makeshift battlefields, where groups of kids would take aim at soda cans, fence posts, or even each other, turning friendly rivalry into epic showdowns. BB gunfights were wild and unscripted, the rules usually invented on the spot. Getting hit by a stray pellet stung like crazy, but it was worn like a badge of honor. Proof you didn't back down. Those little welts were tokens of bravery, and no one wanted to be the first to call it quits. Helmets or safety goggles? Not a chance. The only armor was a heavy sweatshirt, if you remembered to grab one. Parents might offer a half-hearted warning, but most shrugged off the risks. Kids were trusted to handle themselves, and a little danger was just part of growing up. The idea of organized play or strict safety rules felt foreign. Back then, childhood was all about taking risks, pushing limits, and learning lessons the hard way. It was a different world, one where adventure was always just a backyard away. Exploring abandoned buildings, there was something irresistible about a crumbling old house or forgotten warehouse at the edge of town. To a group of kids in the 70s, those places were an open invitation. Mystery and adventure hiding behind every warped door. Armed with nothing but curiosity and maybe a flashlight pilfered from Dad's toolbox, we'd slip through broken windows, squeezing past tangled weeds and sagging boards. Inside, danger lurked everywhere. Rusty nails jutting from the floor, shards of glass catching the light, and floors that creaked with every step. None of that slowed us down. Every abandoned building became whatever we wanted. A haunted mansion, a pirate's lair, or the headquarters of a secret club known only to us. Each peeling wallpaper or dusty trunk fueled stories about lost treasures, hidden rooms, or the lives that once filled these spaces. Parents hardly ever asked where we were. Freedom was the rule, not the exception. Sure, there was always the risk of a scrape or a run-in with something sharp, but to us, a tetanus shot was just the price of admission. Exploring those forgotten buildings was about more than mischief. It was about discovery, imagination, and the kind of fearless curiosity that defined childhood in a very different time. What's the riskiest thing you ever did growing up? Tell us your wildest story from the 1970s in the comments below. Rolling down hills in tractor tires. Imagine a hill baked in sunlight. Laughter echoing as a group of kids circles around a giant tractor tire. To us, that beat-up rubber ring wasn't just farm equipment. It was our personal roller coaster. Someone would squeeze inside, knees tucked tight, and with a wild countdown, friends would give it a mighty shove. Suddenly, you were tumbling down the hill, spinning and bouncing, not knowing which way was up or where you'd land. Every twist, bump, and jolt brought a fresh wave of excitement. It didn't matter if you crashed into a bush, toppled into a muddy ditch, or rolled halfway across someone's yard. The crazier the ride, the louder the laughter. Helmets? Supervision? Not even a thought. Getting out of that tire, dizzy, grass-stained, and grinning from ear to ear was all part of the fun. For us, the bruises and scraped elbows were just souvenirs of another epic afternoon spent defying gravity and common sense. That wild, slightly reckless joy, no screens, no rules, just pure childhood daring, made these rides legendary. It's amazing, really, that most of us survived with nothing worse than stories to tell and a lifelong love of a little adventure. Dangerous playgrounds. There was nothing quite like the playgrounds of the 70s. Sunlight bouncing off towering metal monkey bars, slides that could nearly fry an egg, and merry-go-rounds that spun so fast it felt like you might launch into orbit. The jungle gym seemed endless, daring kids to climb higher and leap farther than ever before. Beneath your feet, not rubber mats or padded surfaces, just unforgiving dirt, gravel, or even bare concrete waiting to greet every tumble. We climbed, jumped, and balanced on narrow beams with a mix of courage and recklessness, cheering each other on as we raced to the top. The swings became rocket ships, soaring so high the legs of the set sometimes lifted off the ground with a satisfying thunk. The merry-go-round was a true test of bravery. Everyone clung to the bars, hearts pounding, as friends spun it faster and faster until we stumbled off, dizzy and laughing. Bruises, scrapes, and the occasional burn were just part of the adventure. No one called time out for a little blood. You just brushed off the dirt and kept playing. Those wild playgrounds, dangerous as they seem by today's standards, were where we learned resilience, creativity, and the thrill of pushing our limits. Eating wild plants. There was a certain magic to childhood adventures spent outdoors in the 70s. Pockets bulged with acorns, rocks, and the occasional lucky feather. But the real prize was always something edible plucked straight from the wild. A patch of wild strawberries spotted at the edge of the woods? That meant an instant snack break. Honeysuckle vines became nature's candy dispensers. Everyone knew how to pinch the stem and sip the sweet nectar inside. Curiosity, and maybe a dash of bravado, led kids to sample just about anything that looked tasty, from sour clover to the tart burst of wild blackberries. The thrill wasn't just in the taste, but in the risk. Sure, there were whispers about berries that could make you sick or plants to never touch, but figuring out what was safe was half the fun. Parents or older siblings would pass down their foraging wisdom, and you'd show off your finds like badges of honor. Eating wild plants taught lessons you couldn't get from a classroom: how to observe, experiment, and respect the mysteries of the natural world. It was about independence, resourcefulness, and the pride that came from living off the land, even if the land was just your backyard. These days, kids are warned to be extra careful, and rightfully so. But sometimes that carefulness comes at the expense of those simple, sweet moments of discovery. Building makeshift bike ramps. Back in the 70s, it was a common sight to see a group of kids huddled around a pile of old boards and scraps, eyes shining with excitement. Bikes parked to the side, everyone pitched in to build a homemade bike ramp, a real launch pad for childhood dreams. These ramps weren't anything you could buy in a store. They were made out of whatever wood or planks you could get your hands on, as long as you could prop them up against something and ride over it. Most of the time, these ramps were anything but sturdy. They always felt a little shaky, which just made every jump that much more nerve-wracking. Some kids even had the guts to lie down right in front, acting as human obstacles for their buddies to jump over. Thinking back, it was pretty wild. No helmets, no protective gear, just laughter, cheers, and the proud pain of a hard fall. Scraped knees and epic wipeouts weren't badges of shame. They were treasured memories, proof you were brave enough to take a risk. Those homemade ramps weren't just a way to pass the time. They were a symbol of the 70s spirit. Improvising, toughing it out, and daring to try the unknown. Kids today might have access to safer store-bought ramps, but they're probably missing out on that rush of excitement, creativity, and freedom that came from building your own challenge and conquering it with your friends by your side. Chasing DDT Trucks. Whenever that familiar rumble echoed down the block and a white cloud began to drift from the back of a slow-moving truck, every kid in the neighborhood knew exactly what to do. Laughter erupted as we sprinted after the DDT truck, diving headfirst into the thick, cool fog it left behind. The denser the cloud, the bigger the thrill. Nobody wanted to miss out on the fun. Nobody really knew or cared about what was in that cloud. Parents might watch from the porch or wave as we disappeared into the haze, never seeming worried. For us, it was just another summer game, a way to break up the heat and create a memory with friends. Now, it's hard to believe we played so fearlessly in those chemical clouds, never realizing the risks. What seemed like an innocent ritual turned out to be one of those wild moments from the past that makes us shake our heads and count our luck today. Thank you for watching. To continue with more content, comment 1 to let us know you're still following. Hooky Bobbing. Snowy days had a special kind of thrill, especially when kids turned the streets into their own winter playground, with a stunt called Hooky Bobbing. All it took was a patch of ice, a good pair of boots, and the nerve to grab onto the bumper of a passing car. With one quick grip, you'd become a human sled, sliding and skidding behind as the car picked up speed. Every bump in the road, every twist or turn, just made the ride more wild and unpredictable. No sled? No problem. Creativity and maybe a dash of recklessness was all you needed. Hooky bobbing became the ultimate snow day tradition, filling long, school-free afternoons with laughter and a rush of adrenaline. course, there were bumps and bruises and plenty of close calls, but that just added to the adventure. For a generation of kids, finding new ways to have fun, even if it meant bending the rules, was all part of the magic of growing up in that era. Playing with fireworks. Lighting a fuse and waiting for that burst of sparks was a rite of passage every summer. For kids growing up in the 70s, fireworks meant freedom and a rush of excitement mixed with a dash of danger. Cherry bombs, bottle rockets, black cats. You'd find them in pockets and backpacks, ready for the next backyard show. Supervision was rare. The only rules were to keep your fingers crossed and stand back. Backyards became launching pads. Old cans and dirt piles transformed into targets. And every pop or whistling rocket sent kids cheering or scrambling for cover. Mishaps were just part of the adventure. A firecracker going off too soon, or a rocket zipping off sideways and startling the neighbor's dog. Those minor accidents like singed eyebrows or stinging fingers became badges of honor and stories to brag about later. For many, fireworks weren't just about the explosions. They were about testing your nerves, impressing friends, and learning by trial and error. Parents stood back and let kids figure things out, sometimes the hard way. Sure, it was risky, but it was also a time of independence, creativity, and unforgettable summer nights spent watching sparks dance in the dark. Roughhousing and sports. Back then, any open street could instantly become a football field or a hockey rink, with kids gathering for a game that was all about grit, toughness, and having a blast. No fancy pads, no helmets, just scraped elbows, grass stains, and a whole lot of heart. The rules were simple: play hard, play fair, and don't back down. Every collision, bruise, or busted lip was worn like a badge of honor, proof that you'd left it all out there. Full contact wasn't just allowed, it was expected. Games got heated, arguments flared, and sometimes fists did too, but we always figured it out ourselves. No referees, no parents stepping in, just a handshake or a friendly shove once it was over. We'd play until the streetlights flickered on, bodies sore, faces dirty, and spirits sky high. These neighborhood games weren't just about keeping busy. They were a crash course in teamwork, resilience, and respect, both for yourself and for your rivals. We learned how to handle setbacks, push through pain, and settle our own scores. Compared to the structured leagues and padded-up safety of today, there was something raw and joyful about playing purely for the love of the game, without anyone keeping score but us. No shirts, no shoes, no problem. On a summer day, the neighborhood came alive with kids racing through the streets. No shirts, no shoes, just pure freedom. Whether it was bikes, skateboards, or scooters, nobody worried about what they were wearing. Feeling the sun on your back and the pavement under your bare feet was part of the adventure. Hours slipped by as we played tag, built forts, and explored every corner of the block without a thought for shoes or sunscreen. Of course, running wild meant a fair share of scrapes, stubbed toes, and bug bites. Sunburns and poison ivy were almost badges of honor, and every mom had a stash of Bactine, mercurochrome, and calamine lotion ready for whatever the day brought home. We learned quickly to dodge prickly weeds and recognize the telltale leaves of poison ivy, at least most of the time. It's surprising looking back that we didn't get hurt more often, but those endless barefoot afternoons captured the spirit of growing up in the 70s. Resilient, curious, and always ready for the next adventure. Back then, it wasn't about playing it safe. It was about squeezing every drop of joy from a sun-soaked day and testing our limits, one bare step at a time. Riding bikes without helmets. There was a time when kids jumped on their bikes and sped off with nothing but a burst of excitement and the wind in their hair. Helmets weren't even part of the conversation. Those were for daredevils and stuntmen, not regular kids cruising the neighborhood. Whether it was a quick ride to a friend's house or a day-long adventure through every alley and back street, nobody gave a second thought to head protection. Parents trusted us to be careful, and we trusted our own skills behind the handlebars. The risk? It simply felt like part of the fun. Scraped elbows and skinned knees were normal, but head injuries weren't something people really talked about. Until things began to change. By the late 70s and early 80s, studies and safety campaigns started to highlight the dangers of bike accidents and the importance of wearing helmets. Slowly, families got on board, posters went up, schools got involved, and soon enough, wearing a helmet became just another part of riding a bike. These days, cycling means safety comes first, even if that means giving up a bit of that wild, wind-blown freedom. We may miss the old feeling, but knowing we're protected makes every ride a little bit easier on everyone's mind. If you could relive one wild childhood moment, which would it be? Owning exotic pets, especially big cats. Back in the 60s, the exotic pet craze was in full swing. It wasn't unusual to hear about someone in the suburbs with a monkey, a turtle, or even something as wild as a lion or tiger living in their home. These animals were seen as exciting conversation pieces, something that made your family unique. Most people didn't think twice about the animal's welfare or how taking them from the wild might impact the environment. Some stories are almost unbelievable today. There's the famous case of Neil the lion, who lived with actress Tippi Hedren and her daughter Melanie Griffith. Photos show Neil lounging around the house, playing in the pool, and even curling up in bed alongside the family as if he were just another pet. All of that seems shocking now, but at the time there were hardly any rules or restrictions. Things are very different today. Laws like the Endangered Species Act and international agreements make it nearly impossible to own exotic animals as pets, especially big cats. We now know these creatures don't belong in backyards or family photos. They belong in their natural habitats. Attitudes have changed, and so have the laws, all in the name of conservation and animal welfare. The thrill of owning a wild animal has been replaced by a greater respect for where they truly belong. The wild. Corporal punishment. Not so long ago, spanking and other forms of corporal punishment were just a normal part of growing up. In the 1960s, the phrase, "spare the rod, spoil the child," wasn't just a saying, it was practically a parenting rule. Physical discipline was widely seen as the best way to keep kids in line and teach them right from wrong. For many families, a quick spanking or swat was the go-to answer for misbehavior. And it wasn't limited to the home. Teachers and school principals were just as likely to keep a wooden paddle handy, using it to maintain order in the classroom and drive home a lesson. The sight of a paddle hanging on the wall or sitting on a teacher's desk was enough to keep most kids in check. People truly believed that these methods built character and instilled respect for authority. For generations, being on the receiving end of corporal punishment was considered almost a rite of passage, and few questioned whether it might do more harm than good. But times and attitudes have changed. Research has shown that hitting or spanking children doesn't just cause physical pain, it can also leave lasting emotional scars. Experts now agree that corporal punishment can actually lead to more aggressive behavior, lower self-esteem, and problems with mental health down the road. Today, many countries have banned corporal punishment in schools, and some have even made it illegal in the home. There's been a huge shift toward positive reinforcement and non-violent ways of teaching kids right from wrong. Methods that help children learn, grow, and thrive without fear. This change reflects a broader understanding of children's rights and the importance of building supportive, respectful relationships. Rather than controlling kids through fear, today's approach is all about nurturing their confidence, empathy, and sense of responsibility. Drinking and driving. Parties, neighborhood bars, and family get-togethers once ended with drivers heading home after a few drinks. Barely a thought given to what might go wrong. It was a common sight. Someone waving goodbye, climbing behind the wheel, maybe with friends in tow. Conversations rarely included warnings or second guesses about driving after drinking. The general feeling was relaxed, almost casual about mixing alcohol in cars. Road safety standards were just as loose. Seatbelts were often tucked behind seats or ignored altogether, and speed limits were treated like gentle reminders rather than rules. Few people considered the dangers, and designated driver was an unfamiliar phrase. Jokes about grabbing one for the road were just part of the routine, not red flags. Responsibility behind the wheel was more about bravado than genuine care. Over time, the reality of drunk driving became impossible to ignore. Accidents and heartbreak brought painful lessons. Communities demanded change, and gradually, stricter laws and enforcement were put into place. Campaigns began to spotlight the true risks of driving under the influence, making the consequences clear to everyone. Today, that carefree attitude is gone. Drinking and driving carries tough penalties, and friends are quick to step in before someone makes a dangerous choice. Calling a taxi or rideshare, handing the keys to a sober friend, or planning a safe ride home has become the standard, not the exception. The culture has shifted dramatically, fueled by a deeper understanding of how one careless decision can have devastating, lifelong effects. Society has learned, sometimes the hard way, that a good time should never end in tragedy, and protecting ourselves and each other always comes first. Children working certain jobs. In the 1960s, the rules for kids working were a world apart from what we see now. Out in the countryside and even in small towns, it was perfectly normal for kids, some just barely into their teens and sometimes even younger, to take on real jobs. You'd see kids out in the fields working side by side with adults during harvest, or helping out with chores that today would raise serious safety concerns. Family businesses relied on everyone pitching in. Whether it was running the cash register, stocking shelves, or waiting tables at a family restaurant, kids learned responsibility early. Newspaper routes were a classic gig, with boys waking up before dawn to deliver papers all over the neighborhood, rain or shine. Babysitting was another common job for young girls, and no one asked for certifications or worried much about the rules. Some kids even ended up on factory floors doing light assembly or packaging, work that's now strictly off limits to minors. There just weren't many restrictions. The expectation was that everyone contributed. These days, everything's changed. There are clear laws outlining what jobs kids can do, how many hours they're allowed to work, and what kind of conditions are required. Kids under 16 have extra protections. The focus is on making sure children stay safe, get their education, and have time to just be kids. That shift says a lot about how much more we value childhood today. We recognize now that kids need room to grow, play, and learn, not just work. Lack of environmental regulations. During the industrial boom of the 1960s, factories released smoke and chemicals into the air and water with barely a second thought for the environment. Environmental protection was still a new idea. Few people realized just how much harm pollution could cause. Recycling wasn't part of daily life. Most households and businesses simply used things once and tossed them away. Use and throw was the norm, and landfills steadily grew while rivers and skies paid the price. Concern for the planet was just beginning to surface. It took years of polluted waterways, toxic smog, and mounting health problems before people started demanding change. Gradually, environmental laws were introduced, setting limits on what factories could dump and burn. The focus shifted to preserving clean air and water, protecting wildlife, and looking after our own health. Today, strict regulations guide how industries operate, and environmental awareness shapes the way we live. Recycling bins have become a standard sight, and conversations about sustainability and green technology are part of everyday life. Society now understands that caring for the earth isn't optional. It's necessary for our own survival and for future generations. The journey from unchecked pollution to environmental responsibility marks one of the biggest shifts in how we think about our world. Growing up in the 1960s means you remember this. If you grew up in the 1960s, you remember more than just the headlines. You remember the feeling, the toys, the tunes, the teasing combs and crackling TVs. Some things you had to be there to understand. Ready to unlock those memories? Let's rewind to a time when life was louder, simpler, and full of unforgettable firsts. Boys' Life magazine. If you had scraped elbows, muddy sneakers, and a pocket knife clipped to your belt, you probably had a rolled-up copy of Boys' Life magazine tucked somewhere close by. Launched in 1911 and proudly carried by the Boy Scouts of America, Boys' Life was more than just a magazine. It was a gateway to wild adventure. By the 1960s, every issue felt like a survival guide for the young and fearless. Inside, you'd find stories of outdoor courage, handy how-to guides, hilarious comics, gear ads that sparked daydreams, and corny jokes that always got a laugh at the campfire. Just having a subscription felt like earning an invisible merit badge. You'd read it front to back, then trade it with your buddy like you were passing along a treasure map. Whether you were a scout or not, Boy's Life made you believe you were born for the wild, ready for anything, anywhere. Apollo moon landing. There was something truly special about summer nights in the late 1960s. My cousins and I would sprawl out on the freshly cut lawn, staring at the endless stars above, pretending we were astronauts on a secret mission, waiting for liftoff. Back at school, those clunky black and white TVs would be wheeled into our classrooms like treasure chests, and we'd watch wide-eyed as rockets like Mercury, Gemini, and Apollo blasted into the sky. It wasn't just science, it was pure wonder. But nothing compared to July 20th, 1969. The moment Neil Armstrong stepped onto the moon, it felt like the whole world held its breath, and then exhaled in disbelief and joy. Share your story in the comments and let's take a walk down memory lane together. Duck and cover drills. If you were a kid in the early 1960s, chances are you remember the sharp clang of the school bell, quickly followed by a voice shouting, "Duck and cover!" It wasn't just a drill, it was a sign of the times. Back then, the fear of nuclear war wasn't distant or abstract. It lived right there with us in the classrooms, on our television sets, and in the quiet corners of our homes. I remember crouching under a wooden desk, hands over my head, knees trembling, as if that flimsy desk could protect us from a bomb. My dad even turned our basement into a makeshift fallout shelter, lining the shelves with canned beans and jugs of water after one of President Kennedy's chilling speeches. To us kids, it sometimes felt like a game, like we were brave little spies. But in truth, it shaped how we saw the world. Forever alert, forever changed. The Beatles' arrival in America. You could hear the scream from coast to coast when the Beatles touched down at JFK Airport in 1964. It wasn't just a band arriving, it was the spark that lit an entire generation on fire. I still remember sitting cross-legged on the living room carpet, soda pop fizzing beside me, glued to the Ed Sullivan Show as those four boys from Liverpool sang their hearts out. My older sister practically lost her voice shrieking. It was like Elvis had returned, only multiplied by 4. With their mop-top hair, sharp suits, and charming grins, the Beatles didn't just play music. They brought a new energy, a sense of something bigger coming. Beatlemania was more than screaming fans and catchy songs. It was a cultural shift. For millions of American kids, that night wasn't just entertainment. It was the beginning of a whole new world, one chord at a time. Swanson TV dinners. There's a special kind of memory tucked inside the sound of a foil tray sliding into the oven. If you grew up in the 1960s, you know exactly what I mean. Sunday nights meant gathering at Grandma's house with Dad kicked back in his recliner, the glow of the TV casting shadows, and the mouth-watering smell of Swanson's fried chicken wafting through the room. Swanson didn't just make frozen meals. They created an entirely new way for American families to eat. Those iconic trays with neatly divided portions of meat, veggies, and that scorching hot brownie felt like a little feast made just for you. More than just convenience, these dinners marked a shift in how we spent time together, bringing the family out of the dining room and into the living room. It was modern, it was easy, and somehow it made the night feel just right. The Twilight Zone and the Outer Limits. There was something hauntingly powerful about those black and white screens that could stop you in your tracks, even after the credits faded to black. In the early 1960s, the Twilight Zone wasn't just a show, it was an experience. Rod Serling's calm, measured voice drew you into strange worlds that looked like ours, until they didn't. Every episode came with a twist, a lesson, and a lingering question that stayed with you long after bedtime. Just a few years later, The Outer Limits took things further, opening with the eerie line, "There is nothing wrong with your television set." It was darker, more monstrous, filled with strange creatures, otherworldly threats, and moody visuals that felt way ahead of their time. These weren't just spooky stories, they were mirrors, reflecting human nature, fear, and curiosity. For kids growing up then, they sparked something deeper than fright. They made you think, and they made you wonder. Batman, 1966 TV series. If you were a kid in the 1960s, Saturday nights weren't just another night. They were electric. And nothing lit up the screen or our imaginations quite like Batman. The moment that "nah, nah, 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 Batman" theme exploded from the TV, I'd bolt into the living room, school socks sliding on the floor, heart racing to catch the action. Premiering in 1966, this wasn't just a superhero show, it was a kaleidoscope of color, camp, and cliffhangers. Adam West's deadpan Batman, Burt Ward's eager Robin, and a parade of wild, over-the-top villains turned each episode into a mini-adventure. The bam and pow fight scenes weren't just fun, they were unforgettable. But the real magic? It was a shared moment. Sitting together as a family, laughing, wide-eyed, caught up in the excitement. For one perfect half hour, we were all in Gotham, and it felt like home. Rock'em Sock'em Robots. Some toys never really fade away. They punch their way right into our memories. And if you were a kid in the late 60s, you'll remember the thrill of Rock'em Sock'em Robots. Those noisy little plastic boxers were pure joy in a red and blue ring. My cousin Jake and I would go round after round, mashing those buttons like our lives depended on it, yelling, "Gotcha!" the moment a robot's head popped up. Designed by Marvin Glass and launched by Marx in 1964, it wasn't fancy, but it was loud, fast, and fun. And if battling bots wasn't your thing, Major Matt Mason from Mattel let you take your adventures beyond the stars. Modeled after real NASA astronauts, he looked ready for liftoff, till those bendy wire limbs gave out. But even then, these toys weren't just playthings. They were fuel for the wild, limitless imaginations of a generation raised on rockets and comic books. Howard Johnson's. Was it even a real road trip if you didn't spot that bright orange roof and start begging for a stop? For families in the 1950s and 60s, Howard Johnson's wasn't just a restaurant. It was an essential part of the adventure. Whether you were packed into the family station wagon or cruising in Dad's big Buick, seeing those signature cupola roofs and turquoise signs felt like hitting a familiar checkpoint. With friendly staff in cheerful uniforms and a menu you could always count on, Hojo's gave weary travelers a comforting slice of home. Their legendary fried clams, crispy and golden, always tasted better in a vinyl booth. And those 28 ice cream flavors? A kid's dream come true. If you got a cone after dinner, that meant the day had gone just right. Twister and Hot Wheels. Introduced by Milton Bradley. In 1966, this game turned any party into a tangled mess of limbs, socks, and laughter. It didn't matter how old you were once that spinner landed on right-hand red, it was game on. Twister was one of the first games that made getting close part of the fun, and people loved every awkward second. Meanwhile, kids with a need for speed were obsessed with Hot Wheels, which zoomed into toy stores in 1968. Shiny cars with flame decals raced down orange plastic tracks that clicked together like magic. And let's not forget the classics. Barbies, G.I. Joes, and astronaut figurines that let us chase dreams bigger than our living rooms. Schwinn Stingray. There's nothing quite like the freedom of that first solo ride around the block. The wind in your face, no parents in sight, just you and the open sidewalk. In the mid-1960s, that feeling had a name, the Schwinn Stingray. This wasn't just a bike, it was a statement. With its banana seat, sky-high ape-hanger handlebars, and low-slung frame, the Stingray looked more like a muscle car on two wheels than a kid's bike. Al Fritz designed it in 1963, inspired by the hot-rodding California kids who were turning basic bikes into chopper-style cruisers. And when Schwinn released it, boom! Every kid on the block wanted one. I'll never forget the day I got mine. Metallic blue with white handle grips and a shiny sissy bar that scraped the pavement when I stopped too fast. That bike didn't just take me around town, It made me feel like I could conquer the world. Thank you for watching. To continue with more content, comment 1 to let us know you're still following. Walter Cronkite's Vietnam broadcast. In February 1968, something happened that shook the nation. Not on a battlefield, but on our television screens. Walter Cronkite, the most trusted man in American news, stepped away from his usual calm, objective tone after witnessing the Vietnam War firsthand during the Tet Offensive. In a rare moment of editorial honesty, he looked straight into the camera and called the war a stalemate. For families like mine, who gathered every night around the TV to hear his voice, it was more than a report, it was a reckoning. If Cronkite was questioning the war, something had truly changed. Even President Lyndon Johnson reportedly felt the shift, saying, "If I've lost Cronkite, I've lost Middle America." That one broadcast did more than just inform the public. It helped to steer national opinion. It showed the power of the evening news, not just to reflect reality, but to challenge it. Metal strap-on roller skates. If you grew up in the 60s, then you know real childhood danger came with 4 metal wheels and a key around your neck. I'm talking about those clunky metal roller skates, the ones you strapped over your sneakers with leather buckles that never quite stayed tight. They rattled like an old grocery cart and made the sidewalk feel like an obstacle course. But we didn't care. The thrill of speed, the wind in your hair, and that feeling of freedom were worth every wobble and wipeout. Inspired by James Plimpton's 1863 quad skate design, these skates had one brilliant feature. They were adjustable, growing with your feet. And sure, skating rinks were popping up, but the real action? That was right outside your front door. Racing down the block, dodging rocks, and praying your wheels didn't go flying off at the corner. It wasn't just fun, it was fearless. Roger Maris, Mickey Mantle, and the Summer of '61. In the summer of 1961, you didn't need soap operas or cliffhangers. Baseball had it all. That year, the entire country tuned in as Roger Maris and Mickey Mantle battled it out, chasing Babe Ruth's legendary 60 home run record. Mantle, the fan favorite, was all swagger and spotlight. But when an injury pulled him from the race, it was quiet, humble Maris who kept swinging. And on October 1st, he cracked number 61 into the stands and into the history books. Kids everywhere were caught in the excitement, flipping tops cards on sidewalks, trading stats like stocks, and chewing through sticks of bubblegum as if each pack might hold a slice of greatness. Owning a Mantle card was bragging rights. Pulling Maris? That was gold. Cap guns. Bang! That sharp pop and puff of smoke could only mean one thing. Someone just drew their Stallion 45. In the 50s and 60s, cap guns weren't just toys. They were the ultimate badge of backyard bravery. Every kid wanted one, and every game somehow turned into a Wild West showdown. Whether you were chasing bandits through the bushes or staging a high-noon duel at the mailbox, those tiny red rolls of paper caps brought the action to life. The smell of gunpowder, the crack of each shot, the way your fingers turned black from the caps, it was pure excitement. Inspired by real 1800s, percussion cap guns and fueled by the popularity of TV cowboys like Roy Rogers and Hopalong Cassidy, these toy revolvers looked so real they could pass at a glance. Brands like Mattel and Nichols turned out masterpieces, and for a few dusty, loud minutes, you were the story. Sea monkeys. Created by Harold von Braunhut. In 1957, these tiny brine shrimp came packaged like magic. Just add water, and suddenly life would begin to wiggle and swim in your living room. The comic book ads, illustrated by Joe Orlando, promised way more than science. They showed smiling, humanoid sea creatures with families, castles, and a whole bubbly civilization. What you actually got were specks swimming in a plastic tank. But for a kid, that was enough. You'd watch them grow, feed them carefully, and imagine entire worlds beneath the surface. They even made it to space with John Glenn in 1998. The Andy Griffith Show. When The Andy Griffith Show first aired in 1960, it didn't just entertain, it comforted. Set in the fictional town of Mayberry, it captured the charm of small-town life with a gentle touch that stood in stark contrast to the turbulence of the decade. Sheriff Andy Taylor with his calm wisdom, his curious son Opie, the lovable but bumbling Barney Fife, and sweet Aunt Bee felt more like neighbors than characters on a screen. Each episode wrapped a simple problem in humor, heart, and a quiet moral, reminding us that patience, kindness, and a good front porch talk could go a long way. The show's popularity sparked spin-offs like Gomer Pyle, USMC, and decades later, its reruns still hold up. Watching it felt like returning home, to a place where life slowed down just enough to appreciate the small things. And that feeling never really left. Surf music. Sunshine, sea breeze, and a guitar that sounded like it was riding a wave. That was surf music. In the early 1960s, it wasn't just a genre, it was a way of life. It all kicked off with Dick Dale, the king of the surf guitar, whose rapid-fire picking and reverb-soaked riffs in Let's Go Trippin', 1961, created a sound that felt like surfing. His music was raw, wild, and electric, like catching the perfect wave at full speed. Then came the Beach Boys and Jan and Dean, with their silky vocal harmonies and sun-drenched lyrics about hot rods, girls, and hanging ten. Even if you'd never seen the ocean, their music made you feel like you were there. Through transistor radios and 45s, surf music gave kids everywhere a window into California's endless summer. Carefree, rebellious, and totally unforgettable. Jacks! Before screens and batteries ruled playtime, all it took was a small rubber ball and a handful of jacks to create endless fun. By the 1960s, this age-old game, dating all the way back to ancient Greece and Rome, had become a staple of schoolyards, front porches, and playgrounds across America. The rules were simple, but the challenge was real. Whether you were playing onesies or working your way up to eightsies, jacks tested your hand-eye coordination, rhythm, and nerves of steel. I can still see my sister flicking that ball in the air and scooping up the jacks with lightning speed, ending with her signature victory dance and a grin that said it all. In a fast-changing world filled with new technology and futuristic dreams, jacks held on to something timeless, a kind of joy that came not from flashing lights but from skill, laughter, and the pure thrill of getting it just right. The beehive hairdo. In the 1960s, big hair wasn't just fashion, it was a declaration. And nothing said style louder than the iconic beehive. With its sculpted height and swirling volume, the beehive turned everyday women into glam queens, right there in their kitchens or at the corner store. Armed with teasing combs, bobby pins, and a cloud of Aquanet hairspray, women spent their mornings building a hairstyle that didn't just sit, it stood. The beehive wasn't subtle, and it wasn't meant to be. It was confident, commanding, and a little rebellious. Inspired by stars like Dusty Springfield, Audrey Hepburn, and even your neighbor down the block, it blurred the line between celebrity style and suburban chic. Whether you were headed to the diner or just picking up groceries, that towering hair said, "I showed up, and I mean business." American Bandstand. Back in the 1960s, Saturdays had their own beat, and it came straight from American Bandstand. With Dick Clark as the ever-cool host, his smooth voice made every teen feel like they were right there on the dance floor. This wasn't just a TV show, it was the soundtrack of our youth. From our living rooms, we watched as Motown legends, pop stars, and rock newcomers lit up the screen. Smokey Robinson, Stevie Wonder, Sonny and Cher, and so many more. Every week brought a new sound and a new dance. Whether it was the twist, the mashed potato, or the pony, we copied every step and practiced them until we got it just right. But more than the music, Bandstand gave us something bigger, a sense of belonging. It connected kids from every corner of the country and made Saturday afternoons feel like the heartbeat of a generation. Walt Disney's Wonderful World of Color. Some memories don't fade, they shine in vivid color. And for many of us growing up in the 1960s, Sunday nights meant one thing: Walt Disney's Wonderful World of Color. That show wasn't just a TV program, it was a weekly escape into a world of wonder. The moment that rainbow-colored intro swirled across the screen on NBC, the ordinary melted away. We'd gather on the floor, still in our stiff church clothes, while Dad adjusted the rabbit ears, trying to fix the fuzz. And then came Walt's familiar voice, calm and welcoming, inviting us on an adventure that might include cartoons, nature documentaries, or magical peeks behind the scenes of Disneyland. Banana bikes and summer dares. Back in the 1960s, summers had a kind of freedom that's hard to describe but impossible to forget. Sunscreen? Optional? Helmets? Never heard of them. Our banana bikes were our pride and joy, with tall handlebars and long, cushy seats made for cruising the neighborhood like kings of the pavement. All we needed was a steep hill, a friend who was just wild enough to race with no hands, and the thrill of wind in our faces. I still laugh, thinking about the day in '67 when Tommy dared me to ride with my eyes closed. We both went flying straight into Mrs. Parker's prized rose bushes. Childhood then wasn't packed with plans or screens. It was dusty roads, lemonade stands, and dreams as big as the moon. Even when the world felt noisy and uncertain, those simple, wide-open days gave us room to imagine, explore, and just be kids. Tell us which one you had and what it meant to you growing up. Star Trek, 1966 TV series. In 1966, this wasn't just a sci-fi show, it was a bold vision of what the future could be. Each week, the USS Enterprise didn't just visit distant planets, it explored ideas we weren't always ready to face here on Earth. I used to watch it with my uncle, a quiet Vietnam veteran who barely reacted to anything on TV, except for Spock's raised eyebrow or Scotty's last-minute miracle. The show gave us more than aliens and phasers. It showed a world where people of every background worked together, where problems were solved with logic, not violence. At a time when the news was filled with division and war, Star Trek offered a calm, thoughtful escape, and, more importantly, hope. Jiffy Pop. Before microwaves took over the kitchen, there was Jiffy Pop. And if you grew up in the 60s, you know it wasn't just popcorn. It was an event. You'd tear off the cardboard top, place that shiny silver dome on the burner, and wait for the magic to happen. At first, it just sat there, quiet. Then came the faint sizzle. A pop. Then another. And suddenly the whole thing puffed up like a balloon. It was like a science experiment and a snack all in one. Invented in 1958 by Frederick Menon, Jiffy Pop gave kids the thrill of cooking something real, with just a little shake of the handle and a whole lot of anticipation. That golden foil crown meant something special was happening. And the payoff? Warm, buttery popcorn that always felt like a homemade victory. The Jetsons. If you were a kid in the early 1960s, the future wasn't some distant mystery. It was right there on your TV screen every Sunday night, thanks to the Jetsons. Premiering in 1962 on ABC, this animated series gave us a peek into a world filled with flying cars, moving sidewalks, talking appliances, and sassy robot maids like Rosie. It was one of the first shows ever broadcast in color, making its shiny space-age vision even more magical. Though it only aired 24 original episodes, the show's impact was massive. The Jetsons wasn't just a cartoon, it was an open invitation to imagine. Back then, we still had rotary phones and black and white TVs, so seeing George Jetson press a button to make dinner or video chat from his desk felt like science fiction come true. Good Luck Trolls. Created in 1959 by Danish woodcarver Thomas Dam, as a simple gift for his daughter, these quirky little figures quickly became global icons. Originally carved from wood with wild woolen hair, they were equal parts weird and wonderful. By 1964, their popularity had skyrocketed so much that Dam reportedly bought up Iceland's entire wool supply just to keep up with the demand. Kids believed that if you rubbed their bright neon hair, good luck would follow. And honestly, most of us didn't need convincing. Whether they sat on your bookshelf, clung to your pencils, or adorned your lunchbox, trolls were the must-have charm of the moment. TV tube testers. Back in the 1960s, Saturday mornings had their own special routine. Cartoons with a bowl of cornflakes, then a trip to the local drugstore with Dad to test the TV tubes. Before the age of flat screens and smart TVs, those big boxy sets ran on vacuum tubes. And when the picture turned snowy or the sound fizzled out, you didn't call a repairman. You grabbed a paper sack of warm glass tubes and headed to the pharmacy. Near the photo counter, there was always a big metal tester machine, buzzing faintly like it knew secrets. You'd plug in each tube one by one, watching the little needle anxiously. Good meant relief. Bad meant replacement. I'd stand there proud just to be part of it, while Dad chatted with the pharmacist. And if we fixed the problem, we'd be back on the couch that night, just in time for the Sunday movie, TV glowing like new. Go-Go boots. These sleek mid-calf icons weren't just shoes, they were a full-on fashion revolution. First introduced by French designer André Courrèges, Go-Go boots quickly strutted off the runway and onto American sidewalks. With their space-age look, low square heels, and glossy vinyl finish, they captured the fearless spirit of a generation that was stepping into the spotlight. Whether you were dancing along with Hullabaloo or watching your older sister tease her hair and zip up her pair before a school dance, those boots symbolized style, sass, and self-assurance. They made a statement. You were bold, modern, and ready to move. And once they were on your feet, you didn't just walk, you glided, full of confidence, making every sidewalk feel like your own personal catwalk. Which of these 1960s memories brought back the strongest feelings for you and why? Tang and space food sticks. Back in the 60s, if you wanted to feel like a real astronaut, you didn't need a spaceship, just a glass of Tang. That bright orange powder mixed with water wasn't just a sugary drink. It was your first step towards space. After NASA sent Tang along on John Glenn's 1962 mission, every kid with stars in their eyes had to have it. We believed one sip could take us straight to the moon, and then there were space food sticks. Those chewy, crayon-shaped snacks that somehow straddled the line between strange and awesome. They were dense, rubbery, and came in funky flavors like chocolate and peanut butter, but we didn't flinch. If astronauts were eating them in zero gravity, we were happy to do the same at the kitchen table. Easy Bake Oven. When Kenner rolled out the Easy Bake Oven in 1963, it instantly became more than just another toy. It was every kid's entry ticket into the grown-up world of cooking. Shaped like a tiny pastel oven and powered by two simple 100-watt light bulbs, this little appliance worked magic. Slide a pan in one side, let the bulb do its job, and out came a warm, slightly lopsided treat. Cookies, cupcakes, even brownies. I still remember my little sister handing me a vanilla cake she baked herself, still gooey in the middle but beaming with pride. That was the magic of the Easy Bake. It wasn't about perfect recipes or fancy techniques. It was about feeling independent, creative, and capable. For many of us, it was the first time we felt the joy of serving something homemade. Proof that a dash of imagination and a light bulb could go a long, delicious way. Jell-O mold creations. If you grew up in the 1960s, chances are your dinner table, especially at family gatherings, featured a Jell-O mold that looked more like a science project than a side dish. Every family had that one aunt who saw Jell-O not as dessert, but as art. With a flick of the wrist and a trusty bundt pan, she'd create colorful towers of gelatin packed with whatever she had on hand. Sometimes it was fruit and marshmallows. Other times it was shredded carrots, tuna, or, brace yourself, green olives. You never quite knew what was waiting inside that wobbly, translucent dome. Jell-O even encouraged the creativity with flavors like celery and Italian salad. Kids approached it with a mix of curiosity and dread. But love was baked, well, chilled, into every mold. Wham-O Super Ball. What toy could fly higher than your roof, vanish into the neighbor's yard, and send your dog into a frenzy? That would be the legendary Wham-O Super Ball. Released in the mid-1960s, this little black sphere looked unassuming, but once you bounced it, all bets were off. Made from a top-secret synthetic rubber called Zectron, the Super Ball didn't just rebound, it launched. One hard slam to the pavement, and it would rocket skyward, ricochet off walls, and sometimes disappear completely. Kids were hooked, chasing it across driveways and dodging it like it had a personality. Even adults couldn't resist its odd charm. Rumor has it the Super Ball even inspired the name for the Super Bowl. In an age before smartphones and consoles, it delivered non-stop, unpredictable fun. It didn't need batteries or buttons, just a bit of sidewalk and a strong arm. The Super Ball was pure, bouncing chaos, and we loved every second of it. Those 1960s memories may have faded from the headlines, but they're forever etched in our hearts. If we missed one of your favorites, drop it in the comments. What other wild childhood risks do you remember? Drop your stories in the comments. I'd love to hear what you survived. If this trip down memory lane brought back some laughs or surprises, check out the rest of our series for more nostalgic adventures. Don't forget to subscribe and share Past Not Past with a friend. Thanks so much for watching, and see you next time.